What's up, everybody? Make sure that thing's going. All right, we stopped here yesterday with John Muir. John Muir, you have to know, for the Sierra Club, but most importantly, he and Teddy Roosevelt are going to create national parks. He's going to inspire Teddy Roosevelt. He takes him camping to create national parks and public preserves. This is yesterday. Okay, today, this is a painting called American Gothic. It was painted in the 1930s, and unbelievably, this is a man and his daughter. Most of us think it's a man and his wife. It is not a man and his wife. So, struggles of the Western farmer. We are talking about people that are in the Plain States, especially about the Plain States, 160 acres from the Homestead Act with Lincoln in 1862. High costs and low prices coupled with oppression. They had to pay a lot to grow their crops, but got very low pay for the crops that they had. And then the railroad industries, hiking up as high as they wanted, no regulation, laissez-faire economics. They could charge whatever they wanted, and it was honestly financially catastrophic for most people that tried to take that 160 acres of farmland and to make it into something productive in those Plain States that's all dust and dirt and very low water. It's crazy. You'd have to have a lot of equipment. International Harvester finally started making steam-powered plows and binders. Binders, got it. They put it together. And reapers and threshers. But the thing is that nobody could really afford that. Very few people could actually afford to have a machine like that. Most people had to work the land by themselves. Cash crops. People started growing cash crops, so they'd only grow wheat, or they'd only grow corn, or they only have cows, they'd only have whatever. And then as a result, if prices or things changed with that particular product, then they were screwed. So it wasn't a good plan. By the 1880s, global food production had increased, so we're starting to get lots and lots and lots of imports from other countries that are trying to ship their food to sell to our people, but then that made competition for the American farmer, and again, made it even harder for them to be successful. Even worse, they put high tariffs into place. You have to know about tariffs, you have to know about tariffs. Tariffs are, again, that's that we would put a wall on people trying to import goods into our country and would make it so much higher because we'd put this tariff on their products. But then the problem was that we were producing more food here in America than we could sell. And so our farmers had to sell stuff overseas. But since we put a high tariff up against their countries, they did the same to us. And so our farmers couldn't compete. They couldn't pay that tariff and still be successful. So it's honestly been a hard road for farmers, forever, as far as industrialization and since 1750. Droughts, grasshopper plagues, heat waves. Now we have in the Midwest flooding today or tomorrow. Hurricane Laura is possibly going to be a hurricane, category 4 hurricane. So these things devastate anybody that's trying to farm anywhere close to those places. In the Midwest, we have had massive floods. As you know, out west, it's a big part of our farming belt, has wildfires. It's not an easy job to have. Sod, they have sod houses. Thousands and thousands of homesteads failed. They lost everything. Most small farmers often blame the corrupt railroad companies who could charge whatever they wanted, and banks for their failures because they charged such huge prices. Freight rates were really, really high, and there was nothing they could do. The trains could charge whatever they wanted. Laissez-faire economics. They were destroyed by that. City, state, and federal governments made it worse, and they taxed them. They taxed them even more, because a lot of you know that if you have land, that you have tax on land, and if you have 160 acres, you have to pay these high taxes. So they get political. They formed various organizations designed to unite the farmers, so they collectively group together, because everybody all by themselves can't fight against the power. So if one of you in my class decides, like, Miss Mallory's terrible, I hate that lady, like, oh God, she's awful, we hate that woman, like, I'm going to the principal's office. I'm going to the principal's office, I'm going to demand Mr. Powell remove her as a teacher. She's a terrible teacher, right? So you go marching off Mr. Powell's office, and if anything, he's like, ooh, chill out, relax, sweetheart, come on, take a breath, calm down. But that's it, nothing's going to happen. But if all of you get up and go, and the entire school gets up and go, and the whole school marches over to his office and is like, that's it, she's terrible, this is what she did, this, he's going to come and find out what's going on in my classroom. So collectively, that's why you have to know this word. It's called collective bargaining. When one of you goes and tries to talk to Mr. Powell to make him to do something you want him to do, he's not going to do anything. Not for one person. But if the entire school and all of your parents come marching in here and tell him what an awful, terrible person and human being and terrible teacher that I am, now you have collective bargaining, and you might be able to have a shot at getting me removed because you have united in numbers, you have strength. By 1890, half of the population were farmers. Half. I think we talked about it last week. We are now 1.3%. Only 1.3% of the United States of America are farmers. That's it. In 1890, 130 years ago, it was half of the people in the country farmed. Can you imagine? Half of the people around you came from farm families, especially here in Shackle Island. The farmers adapted to mechanized farming and their dependence on the railroad system by creating organizations so they could resist corporate control. We talked about it before, agribusiness. Agribusiness started in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and big businesses that could afford all of those machines started selling their products for way less than a normal farmer or family farmer could do, and it wrecked them. So you have to know the Grange. The Grange, the Grange, the Grange. The Grange are farmers who unite together to try to protect their interest. The Grange, if you say home, home on the range means out in the country. So if you think of the Grange as being out in the range, the open spaces, farmers, farmers, farmers equals the Grange. You have to know the Grange. It equals farmers. They unite together, but they also do it for social and political reasons. I mean, not just for political reasons. These are the political reasons. Okay, they organized in the Midwest, the South, and Texas, where most of the farmers were. They created cooperative associations, so they would also buy a lot of seed all together so that they could get a lower price because they bought so much more seed. They would buy things together to get lower prices. They had social and educational components. Remember, a lot of those poor kids are not going to school, so sometimes they'd form and have some people teach some of the younger kids, but by the time they got a little bit older, they had to work out on the farm. They would also have educational components about how to train them how to be better farmers. And then they lobbied for Granger laws, Granger laws, Granger laws. Obviously, that is farming laws. And then rapidly declined by the late 1870s. The Grange is gone. The Grange sought to improve the lives of isolated farmers. I told you that you guys are like 160 acres away from anybody else close to you. So on Sundays, everybody would go to the Grange. My grandfather was a farmer, and he belonged to a Grange. I remember going to the Grange when I was a kid, and that was in the 60s. And I went to the Grange because that's where the people they hung out with, they were all farmers. They were all social. They would do things together, and it was good for their education and just fraternal activities. Friends, being friends with all those people that do the same thing that you do. Farmers are so far apart and so far removed. They work on their own farms. They live and work by themselves. So this was good for social and educational and fraternal for people to be friends. My own grandfather was a Granger. So the Grange had 800,000 members at its peak. Their main goal was to address any concerns that the farmers could have collectively. Congress passed Granger laws to help farmers, and then the Supreme Court declared them unconstitutional. Screwed at every turn. Some people tried to afford these machines. It wasn't easy to be able to afford these machines. You can see this is somebody apparently on their wedding day. The Greenback Labor Party attracted farmers and elected 14 members of Congress. So after the Grange started to fade away, there's farmers' alliances and Greenback labor parties. Greenback means greenbacks, money. They only helped those who own lands. Tenant farmers, sharecroppers, they didn't care. They only cared about the people that owned the land. So all of the other people were just poor, wretchedly poor, and nobody cared about that. Farmers' alliances wanted nationalized railroads so they couldn't charge whatever they wanted. They wanted abolition of national banks who screwed them but helped the big businesses. They wanted graduated income tax. That means the people that we have it currently. The less you make, the less you pay. The more you make, the more you pay. Of course, now we have corporate interests and everything else that corporations, big corporations like Bezos, they pay almost nothing in income tax, which is terrible news for us, or tax. The Farmers' Alliances combined into the People's Party. You have to know the People's Party. The People's Party, they referred to it as a populist party. Population, how many people are there in a country? Population. Peoples equals population. And forced the federal government to help farmers. They wanted to secure freedom from the onerous and shameful abuses that the industrial classes are currently facing in the Northeast and the Midwest. We talked about that the Midwest and the Northeast is industrial. We're now talking about the middle states, the prairie states that are trying to farm this land, and they want to make sure that what's happening to all those industrial people doesn't end up happening to them. Even that, the black men couldn't even be in the other farmers' alliances. They had to create their own farmers' alliance because nobody would let them into theirs. We were aware of the fact the laboring colored man's interest and the laboring white man's interest are one and the same, but they wouldn't let him in. So populism, again, people. So you should always think farmers and rural areas. In the late 1890s, early 1900s, populism equals rural areas. And you should know William Jennings Bryan is the hero of populism. William Jennings Bryan. Labor unions. Okay, so we're going back up to the Northeast. We've just been in the Plain States. We're going back up to the Northeast and the Midwest. Chicago, Pittsburgh, Philly, New York, Detroit, St. Louis, Green Bay. We're going to all of these industrial sectors, those factories, and people are creating labor unions. Again, just like the Grange, if you unite to try to fight against everybody, against the people that are in power, you can't do that if you just one of you goes to the principal's office and screams and yells your head off about how terrible or how horrible I am. But if everybody goes, the principal's going to notice. So you have to unite to get action. Can you not get me fired, please? Okay, the ability to bargain collectively. The real strength of the labor union was was undermined by big corporations. They did everything they could to destroy unions. Of course, unions and big corporate power are antithetical to each other. And of course, the big businesses don't want labor unions bargaining collectively in a big group against them. And that's the whole point of a labor union, is to have the poor people, me, this side, the people, to have the people have their rights and to have not 12 hours a day and not have your arm cut off and, oh, well, you lost your job and you're fired and you're probably going to die. So they have to bargain collectively. So clearly the corporations were against that. They were not okay because immigrants would come and they would get paid significantly less. So people would lose their jobs. So actually they were trying to help immigrants get paid more so that people wouldn't lose their jobs to immigrants who would take less money. And to the Great Migration, the freedmen that had gone north who got paid a lot less. And the government seemingly in the hands of big business. They were trying to extricate big business from the government. When we memorized our presidents, that Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland again, all of these people were pro-business. That's why it's called the Gilded Age. The captains of industry, all of those people we've memorized, they had the support of big business. The industrial workforce expanded through migration, people coming into the country, and through internal migration, the Great Migration, freedmen coming from the South to come and work. There was a more diverse workforce, immigrants, black people, everybody, poor, white people, everybody. It drove the wages down. That made a race to the bottom for wages, so wages got worse. And then child labor. I think I told you that a grown man would make $1 an hour or $1 a day. They'd pay a kid 10 cents a day. 10 cents a day. What? Workers desiring better conditions were easily replaced by immigrants who worked for low wages and in awful conditions. But it was still better than the country they came from, where they were wretchedly, horribly poor. Labor and management battle for control over wages and working conditions for the worker. The local and national unions were the ones that tried to fight against the corporate power and corporate greed. Only at the big, grand, macro level where they had bigger resources and a lot more money could they even try to fight against corporate power. Don't forget, because corporate power had the government in their pocket. Labor's greatest weapon was a strike. Still today, people go on strike. It's less now. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, when I was young, there were lots of strikes. Now, labor unions, compared to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, are very, very few in number in the grand scheme of things. I'm not in a teacher's union. When I first started teaching in 1980, I was in a teacher's union for like 10 or 15 years. Now here in the Deep South, there's hardly any teachers' unions. South Florida is a very big urban area. They had a big teachers' union. So strikes, people would go on strikes. Teachers can't go on strikes. They do, but we're not theoretically legally allowed. Strength in numbers. If everybody walks out and goes on strike. So right now you guys are like, that's it, I'm not going to listen to this lady, not one more time. She's ridiculous and horrible and awful. This is terrible. That's it, we're leaving. And so if all of you got out of your seats and you marched out to the front to protest something that was going on in this school that you hated, they got the entire school to go out in front and march, not only would you have some sort of reaction, but you'd have the news stations out here. You would have everybody here like, what's happening at Beach High School? All of the kids have left class and they've gone out front. People will notice that. People are going to. That's what the protests are happening right now. We just talked about it, about the guy that was shot in the back 7 times. And that's why people are protesting. So protest in great numbers gets the attention of other human beings. People in power. So corporations had weapons against labor strikes. They were called strike breakers, and they're known as scabs. So they would go work for the people that left their jobs and were on strike. These scabs, they would get them in there somehow, and they would go on strike, and they would be able to break the strike because the business could still operate if there were enough scabs working. Most of the time, scabs could get beat up or hurt or injured. If they didn't get in there safely, then all of the people that were on strike, they were taking away their livelihood, and they would beat up scabs. They got court orders to stop strikes, and they even brought in troops. Hayes, in the Great Railway Strike of 1877, is the first person to bring Union troops. Keep in mind, Hayes is the one that benefited from the Compromise of 1877, the Great Betrayal, where they removed Union troops in 1877 from the Deep South. Guess where they went? They went to break up a strike, the Railway Strike of 1877. They literally went from the Deep South up to this railway strike. Lockouts starved strikers into submission, or they brought in scabs. So lockouts would lock them out, and then they wouldn't have any money to be able to survive. Workers signed yellow dog contracts. You have to know what a yellow dog contract is. It means that you went there and you got a job and you promised you would not join a union. They were banned from joining a union. Later, I think yellow dog contracts become illegal. But they banned you from joining. If they hired you, then you were not allowed to join a union. Of course, they don't want to hire anybody that will join a union, because that would mean you would collectively bargain for better wages or better conditions, working conditions. Workers were blacklisted for participating in or leading strikes. This denied them employment elsewhere as well. You have to know about blacklisting. We're going to talk about blacklisting in the 50s again later with communism, with the threat of communism. Blacklisted. Most of the leaders of the strikes and a lot of the leaders of the labor unions that worked in the factories, if they were participating, the leaders were participating in strikes, they would be fired and then blacklisted. And so all the other big businesses everywhere around, they would all talk to each other and be like, don't hire this guy, don't hire this guy, don't hire this guy. So that other people would be afraid to become leaders in their unions, so that because they would be fired and not be able to get jobs ever. Blacklisted. The middle class could not care less. They could care less. They did not care about unions and striking and working class. The middle class people were trying to break the glass ceiling above them to get into the wealthy. They were trying, middle management, lawyers, doctors, attorneys, business managers, business supervisors were trying to break the glass ceiling and going into the wealthy. They despised the working classes. They would not support working classes. So, the president of railroad companies all agreed to reduce wages by 10% across the United States of America. As a result, the entire nationwide strikes happened by the railroad workers. It's called the Great Railway Strike of 1877. And as I just told you, Hayes brought in Union troops. He brought in federal troops to break it up. He sent troops to stop workers. Many were the same troops who had just been removed from the South in the Great Betrayal. Over 100 workers were killed in a railway strike. Killed! That wouldn't happen today. Workers were often divided by race. Irish and Chinese hated each other. Italians and the big business would inspire that. They would inspire that. If people are fighting amongst themselves, then they're not going to be worried about fighting and joining together collectively to fight against the people who are truly oppressing them, which is the big business. So they would inspire Irish to hate the freedmen and freedmen to hate the Italians, and they'd inspire that so that they wouldn't work together. So, ordinary working man. They have right here monopolies, and all of these people that are setting fires are the captains of industry, that they're the sticks, the sparks, that are trying to destroy this. So monopolies, they are trying to get rid of monopolies. Industrialists and the government both opposed to them. Worker strikes were often ineffective because they could not stay on strike long enough without starving. Child labor. Child labor. We still have child labor into the 20th century. Just over 110 years ago, little kids were still working. Anywhere up from the ages of like 6 to 12 were actually working, especially coal mines, because they were small and could get in tight places. It's awful. What? Greed, because they could pay, corporations could pay them very little money in the grand scheme of things compared to everybody else. Labor unions began a slow process of development with National Labor Union and the Knights of Labor. Both were met with a fatal mixture of business and government opposition. Business and government, big business and government are together on one side against labor. That's going to change with the progressives. You have to know them. Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. Teddy, Taft, Wilson. By the way, that's our next quiz. 25 through 33. McKinley gets assassinated. The three progressive presidents, Teddy, Taft, and Wilson. You can write it like that on our papers. Teddy, Taft, and Wilson. Hayes, Garfield. Well, no, I said it wrong. McKinley, Teddy, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, FDR. That's your next quiz. That's your next president's quiz. McKinley, Teddy, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, FDR. And as you know, Spanish-American War is going to equal McKinley. You don't know that yet, McKinley. But you do know Woodrow Wilson is World War I. Everybody got it? So those are the war presidents. And also you know that Wilson and FDR are the only Democrats. Okay. The Civil War made labor scarce and more valuable, and thus labor unions grew. A lot of people died. A lot of people died in the Civil War. 600,000 people died. That's a lot of workers that can't come back from that war and work. So labor got scarce. When labor got scarce, that means that people could demand more money, more pay. So, the National Labor Union was the first major workers' union with 600,000 members. It lasted only 6 years. It settled labor disputes and fought for an 8-hour day. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. In other words, for whatever we want to do. 8 hours for whatever we want to do. Remember, people are working minimum 12 hours. They're like, we need 8 hours for the rest, 8 hours for work, and 8 hours for what we will. Excluded the Chinese and ignored minorities and women. It was all men and not minorities, and certainly no women. Okay, so then in 1869, the Knights of Labor was a secret workers' organization that does not go public all the way till 1881 because they'll get smashed by big business. They'll be destroyed by big business. So it was a secret society that were all working against the interests of big business, but they couldn't come out and say that because they could have been literally been killed, and or the organization would have been shattered because big business and the government are working together in the 19th century. So, Knights of Labor. The Knights of Labor barred liquor dealers, gamblers, lawyers, bankers, and stockbrokers from membership. Isn't that funny? Bankers and lawyers are with liquor dealers and gamblers. That's funny. Knights of Labor. Terence Powderly was the leader. The Knights campaigned for economic and social reform for their laborers. Okay, these are the goals. Goals of the Knights of Labor. 8-hour workday. Everybody in the late 19th century was demanding an 8-hour workday. Workers' cooperatives. Everybody's allowed to work together and make more money. Worker-owned factories. That's communism. That's way out here. Nobody's going to give them that. Abolition of child and prison labor. 13th Amendment. Prison labor is legal. But child labor. They're like, okay, can we not have children working? Increased circulation of greenbacks. Dollars, not silver and gold, dollars. Equal pay for men and women. We're still trying to get that. Still today, women make like 80 cents on the dollar to men, if that. I don't think that's even right. Safety codes in the workplace. Oh, you got your arm cut off. Wait, that's a problem. We should make that not happen. Prohibition of contract foreign labor. They're trying to stop immigration. Abolition of the national banking system. They see the national banking system. Remember, J.P. Morgan, the national banking system in cahoots with the government. So they are not okay with a national banking system. Okay, look. Labor. What does that say? I can't tell what that says. The Knights led successful strikes for the 8-hour workday. They finally were able to get an 8-hour workday. These are anti-labor cartoons, remember? So you have to know a lot that political cartoons were even more powerful then than they are now because many people were illiterate. My grandfather was born in 1911, and he had a 6th grade education. I don't know about Grandpa Manwaring. I don't know if he graduated from high school. It's a good question. Grandpa Hayes didn't. He had a 6th grade education. So a lot of people, political cartoons were important because they can look at it and understand. Whereas if you can't read, this is the best you can do is be able to see political cartoons. So they were very powerful. Remember, newspapers are everywhere. So if you could at least look at the political cartoons, you could understand what was going on. The Knights were involved in a May Day strikes that mostly failed. You have to know about this. This is a huge thing. 80,000 Knights gathered in Chicago for a demonstration, and hundreds of anarchists don't want government, attended, calling for the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. So there were a lot of anarchists. Remember, there's a lot of laborers that were immigrants, and immigrants brought ideas of socialism, communism, and anarchy from their countries. Big meeting. Look, it even has it in German, because many of them were immigrants. Okay, so on May 4th, 1886, it's called the Haymarket Square bombing. The Haymarket. It's just what it sounds like. It was a market where you sold your hay. So the Haymarket Square is where they all met. And the Haymarket Square bombing, police moved to break up a meeting, and then dynamite was thrown into the police ranks, and dozens were injured and killed. 1886. So 8 anarchists were rounded up, charged, and convicted. 4 were executed. 1 blew himself up in prison. However, all of these were the leaders of the movement, and all of them could prove they were not there, that they were somewhere else, and they absolutely didn't do it. They didn't throw the bombs. They were literally known that they were in other places. But they convicted them anyway, even though they didn't physically do that particular act. And as a result, they executed 4 of them. 1 guy blew himself up in prison, and the other 3 were later released. But people were furious because there was proof that they didn't throw the bombs, but the government charged them and convicted them and executed them anyway, even though they were just the leaders of the movement. And so they were held responsible for other people's actions, which is not how things work in the United States of America. It's crazy. Okay, so big business against laborers. Laborers trying to go on strike. The Haymarket Square bomb ruined the Knights of Labor for good. Because of this, they were all seen as anarchists. The Knights of Labor was defunct after this because they were all seen as people that would murder cops. By the way, some of the cops, it turns out, died from friendly fire. Friendly fire means that they were the ones with the guns, and then other cops were shot. But the people that had the guns were the cops. And so it turns out some of them actually had shot each other. The American Federation of Labor. The American Federation of Labor developed a winning strategy of uniting various unions of skilled, white, male workers, and they sought progress in certain pragmatic issues about bread and butter issues. You have to know these are the elite people. These are the elite workers. This isn't the riffraff. These aren't the immigrants. These aren't the freedmen. These aren't women and children. These are the elite skilled people. Samuel Gompers founded the AFL in 1896. By the way, he ran it for like 30 years. He had no college education. He proclaimed that he had learned through the factory was my Harvard and Yale. The factory is where I went to school. They were focused on bread and butter issues rather than fundamental social and economic reform. They didn't care about the poor being exceedingly poor. They were skilled laborers. They didn't care about the riffraff laborers. It was an association of self-governing unions uniting different labor unions of skilled workers, skilled metal workers, skilled carpenters, skilled welders, skilled meat packers. Only the skilled laborers were allowed to join these unions of the AFL. Women, they didn't care. Gompers demanded a fairer share for workers, better wages and working conditions, and an 8-hour workday. The garment workers did not get to have a share of this because they were women. They had to create their own garment workers union. One of the main jobs of the organization is the elevation of the lowest paid worker to the standards of the highest. And in time we may secure for every person in the trade an existence worthy of human beings. He's saying that, but he's only still talking about the skilled laborers. Again, political cartoons say everything. So this is a skilled laborer. This is a guy that's not a skilled laborer. And it's showing that he too wants bread and butter. He still wants a living wage. He wants the same issues that the skilled workers have, but they prohibit him from being part of the union. So he's going to come in and steal the stuff if they won't let him be part of the union. The AFL tried to speak for all workers, but the rest of them are like, you don't care about us. You cannot speak for us. So it was composed of only skilled workers. Only 3% of the workforce is who were allowed to be in this union. And they tried to speak for all of them. They're like, you don't speak for us. The Homestead steel strike. You know Homestead. Homestead equals Carnegie. Carnegie went on vacation, intentionally went on vacation when this strike was going to happen. He knew it was going to happen because they cut the rate of money that they were going to pay their workers. So he knew they'd go on strike, so he intentionally went on vacation to Europe so he could act like he didn't have anything to do with it. He did. Homestead steel strikes, 1892. So we just had the Haymarket Square bombing. That was a strike. We had the Homestead steel strike. We had the railway strike, union worker strike. Thousands and thousands of strikes in the late 1800s. Thousands of strikes. We can't tell you about all of them. Thousands of them. These are the famous ones. From 1881 to 1900, 23,000 strikes with 6 million people cost businesses over $450 million, only because they would not treat their workers justly and pay them a fair wage. That's why they went on strike. They just wanted people to be just with them. It brutalizes you. You start to be a man, you become more and more a machine. It drags you down mentally and morally, just as it does physically. I wouldn't mind it so much if it weren't for the long hours. 12 hours is too long. 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for what we will. Okay, by 1900, labor unions finally started to score significant victories against corporations. It is not until the 20th century. By the way, 1901 is when McKinley is assassinated. So Teddy Roosevelt takes over in 1901. He's the first progressive president. Progressive places him over here with me, all of them, Teddy, Taft, and Wilson. And so progressive equals policies that will help ordinary people and laborers. They are the first presidents that are not siding with the big business. Remember, the Gilded Age equals Grant, Lincoln Johnson Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland. Even though Cleveland was a Democrat, they were all pro-business and supported captains of industry against the workers. Not till the 20th century do they make any inroads against these massive corporations. Labor Day was made a legal holiday, 1894. May 5th in the rest of the world. You know when Labor Day is? We're getting ready to have Labor Day. I think it's September 8th this year. So guess what May 5th is? May 5th is the Haymarket Square bombing in Chicago. Here in Chicago, May 5th, 1886, is the Haymarket Square bombing, and that is what the whole rest of the world, an American situation, is why everybody in the world has May Day, May 5th, Labor Day. In the rest of the world, we don't have it till our Labor Day is in September. Completely removed from the reason everybody else has it, that Haymarket Square bombing. And that's because it's anti-labor. It's crazy. The whole rest of the world is May 5th, which was what happened in Chicago here. Anyway, I can't even. First Monday in September. So maybe it's not the 8th then, because that wouldn't be the first Monday. I think it's the 8th. I feel like it's the 8th. Maybe it's the 7th. I think it might be the 7th. Industrialists often lost more money fighting union strikes, so they began to meet labor demands instead. So they had their train, like in the Homestead steel strike, everything was burned to the ground. In a railway strike, everything burned to the ground. These big strikes, they burn and torch everything. Finally, the corporations started realizing, just meet their demands. It's going to cost us less than us having to replace everything that gets destroyed from these massive strikes and this stopping of work for all of those weeks. It's just better to meet their demands. So finally, in the 20th century, labor unions collectively bargain with corporations and start to have their demands addressed. The Gilded Age, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, was an age of big business, but the age of big labor does not really start until the 20th century, when they start meeting those demands. Corruption in government, especially with big business, led to demands for local, state, and national government reforms against this capitalist system that could do whatever it wanted, early 20th century. Okay, growing corporate power inspired workers and activists to create the People's Party. The Populist Party, you have to know the Populist Party is inspired by workers and activists against giant corporations. People, population, it's for the people, ordinary people. Over here, populism is way over here. Farmers are populists, ordinary people. They wanted political reform and a stronger government role in the economic system. They wanted big business not to own and control industry or the government. The government was controlled in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, by big business. That's what they're trying to stop. The Populist Party wants that to end. Again, William Jennings Bryan, populism. A political philosophy supporting the rights and power of the people for their struggle against the privileged elite, especially big business. Their struggle was against the privileged elite, the very wealthy ruling classes. Populists wanted silver coinage because silver was cheaper. Rich people wanted gold because very few people had gold. And so that benefited them. It would make the gold prices higher. Silver was much easier. So poor people, the Populist Party, wants silver. A graduated income tax, I already told you, the less you make, the less income tax you pay. The higher wages you make, the higher income tax you pay. And that's going to be, the 16th Amendment is going to make that. They're going to finally, I think it's like around 1916, the 16th Amendment. Government-owned railroads, so they can't be screwed by these railroads charging whatever the prices they wanted with laissez-faire economics, and government-owned telephones because they're significant for people's safety, phones. Populists wanted the direct election of senators. That's the 17th Amendment. They get that. Instead of state senates, a one-term presidency they wanted. You should know that populism does not gain strength. It gains a lot of strength, but they don't have any very good political victories. They don't have a president. They don't get many senators or governors. But almost all of their platform, eventually, those things happen. No child labor. Direct election of senators, that the people get to vote for senators. A lot of the things that they wanted, an 8-hour day, came to pass. So they don't have big populist victories of human beings that were elected, but they got a lot of their platform was selected. They also wanted people to vote on congressional legislation, which was very democratic. That didn't happen. Populists also successfully reached out to black farmers in the South. Okay, so the Homestead steel strike, we talked about it earlier. It ended in violence from calling up federal troops. 60 people were wounded and 10 were killed. Striking workers began supporting the Populist Party as well. Remember, that was farmers. Old Grover takes over again. Have a good day.